Hello, hello. Can you hear me, Joe?
I can hear you through the headphones now. All right, and my mic's on too.
Am I through the headphones? Here we go. Now I am. All right, hello, hello. Welcome to the first ever episode of Touchdown with Hansen and Brown.
Ooh, sound effects.
I am, of course, David Hansen. Across from me is
Joseph Brown.
And before we get started, a quick disclaimer. You are listening to PizzaFM, free-form, non-commercial college radio broadcasted in partnership with Unit 1 Living Learning Communities at the University of Illinois. The views expressed by individuals on PizzaFM are not necessarily those of Unit 1 or PizzaFM as a whole. PizzaFM is made possible through the generosity and generous support of SORF, the 1867 Society, CRFB, and listeners like you. Thank you. And here we go. So, if you don't know what this is, what you are tuning into, Touchdown with Hansen and Brown, this is a fantasy football kind of podcast, a nice little break from all the music you usually hear on Pizza FM, where we will be talking about NFL news from the week, giving our insight, having a good time over I think Joe and I, we've been friends for a while. We're provide some good banter, but we'll also provide some good advice coming up here.
Well, okay, David will provide some good advice. Disclaimer, anything that comes from me, fantasy football-wise, is entirely through the scope of fantasy football. I don't know anything about football. I don't pay attention to what's going on in the NFL. I have a lot of confidence in what I say, but there is almost never actual, fact backing it up. So I'll put a disclaimer on that in every episode.
That does bring us to the first thing we want to talk about today. Why should we be hosting a fantasy football show? I have been playing fantasy football for maybe 8 years now, maybe 9. I follow the sport very quickly, stay pretty up to date with the stats. Myself, I'm a big math guy. I like following around with the stats, how each player is doing. And Joe, despite him saying that he knows nothing about football, actually does pretty well at fantasy football. This week in our league, you scored
198 points.
This is in a standard PPR scoring league.
So
he scored.
I would just like to say, first off, that 4 of my players went off like crazy. But most of my experience, I've been playing fantasy football for 5 years. I think this is my 6th season. And in those 5 years, I've gotten 9th place in a 10-man league 4 times in a row, and then last year I made the playoffs. So any experience that I offer is from the scope of I figured out how to play fantasy without really watching ESPN football. Like, if it's not in a player's outlook, I don't really know what's going on. And I'll tune into the games on Sunday to see how my players are doing, but I don't know who's getting more touches than who and what that means and what long-term implications are. I only know the numbers that you give me and the outlook. And somehow I've managed to do pretty well with just that information. So I can teach you how to do that well if you don't feel like watching ESPN segments all week long.
So take that as motivation that even you, if Joe Brown can succeed in fantasy football, so can you. All right. But enough about us. Let's get into what we came to talk about, and that is the NFL and fantasy football. And the biggest news coming out of the NFL, at least of right now, there's 2 really big stories. The one we're going to start with today is Melvin Gordon rejoins the Chargers. He is back practicing with them, and he will not be playing this Sunday, but coming up, Melvin Gordon will be starting for the Chargers. Now that's huge. That is so much better than a lot of us thought. A lot of us thought he wouldn't be back till mid-season, week 6, week 8, and he's coming back week 5. So if you drafted Melvin Gordon, you are feeling very happy right now.
Personally, as someone who took Ezekiel Elliott with the 4th overall pick in my entire draft, after it was found out that he hadn't signed his contract, mind you, I really felt for the people who drafted Melvin Gordon. They were actually living through what I thought I was going to have to deal with, and I was very lucky with Ezekiel Elliott. So you got to feel good about that. Melvin Gordon's back in the game, and he is a solid player. He is a workhorse of a running back.
That is true. So if you spent a 3rd round, a 4th round pick on Melvin Gordon, you are as happy as can be right now. And that's great. We'll talk about the implications for the rest of the Chargers, but let's just start with that when Melvin Gordon does come back, he hasn't played football in a little bit, but he is still on a powerful offense with a lot of weapons, even though some of them are injured right now, i.e. Hunter Henry, the tight end. He is still going to be a top 10 running back play week to week and an RB1 that will be set it and forget it. First week back, he may have a couple shaky numbers just because he's trying to get back in the rhythm and things, but he's been on this Chargers team for a while now. He knows the offense. They love him there. I mean, it's a match made in heaven. So if you got Melvin Gordon, congratulations. You got what may have been a first-round pick in a regular season where he had signed with the team before the season started, and you got him later in the draft. Well done.
I'd also like to clarify, when David says shaky numbers for Melvin Gordon is like 10 points on the week.
That's true.
Which is more than you get with most running backs in the league. Like, personally with Ezekiel Elliott, who signed right before the first game, he still played, but he didn't put up his normal numbers. He put up like 12 points, which, again, is better than most running backs in the league could do, and that's the floor for him. That's a bad week. So Melvin Gordon is still totally a RB2, RB1 option for this week, in my opinion.
Well, this week he won't play, but next week is what you mean.
Right.
Yeah.
We've learned the first bit of I have no idea what's going on.
Hey, you're right, though, with everything else about that, of course. We're going to move on to the next segment in a second, but first let's talk about the rest of the Chargers. So for most of them, this really doesn't affect them. If anything, this helps them. I know people might be thinking, well, Phillip Rivers will be throwing less because Melvin Gordon's back in. But they've had a pretty effective run game already with Austin Eckler. So my guess is Phillip Rivers stays around the same of where he is, and that is a quarterback that can be fill-in in some bye weeks. He has a pretty stable floor, but typically does not have that high of a ceiling. Personally, I would not start him unless my number one quarterback is on a bye, but he's still a great quarterback. Keenan Allen, a must-start. It's Keenan Allen. I mean, you saw what he did last week. He is a must-start. Enough said. The other wide receiver from the Chargers, Mike Williams, I believe. I'll check that while I'm talking about him. He's put up not great numbers. He's been a little banged up, but honestly, I think it gets better for him. I mean, he's on an offense that is now even better with Melvin Gordon. He is getting healthier. He's looking better. And it's someone going into the season that everyone was like, you want to be the number 2 wide receiver for the Chargers. So it's not a bad deal. If there's one person that is hurt the most, however, it is running back Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler has been a stud, an RB1 so far in fantasy football. Wouldn't you say, Joe?
I would say that people who picked up Austin Eckler after the draft pretty happy with themselves.
Absolutely.
I mean, but so are people who picked up Tony Pollard. And where is he now?
Good point. Very good point. So, by the way, confirmation, Mike Williams is the name. So Austin Eckler now. You think Tony Pollard, for example, since this is a good comparison, you could have dropped him. He was someone that you no longer needed on your fantasy team once Ezekiel Elliott came back. So what do you do with Austin Eckler? You get one more week of him being the lead running back. Do you trade him? Do you hold on to him? Or do you drop him? And that is the question we're going to talk about.
Well, I would say if you're following the precedent set by Tony Pollard, who backup running back for Ezekiel Elliott now that he's back in, I have a friend who picked him up in my league, I think, 5th or 6th round, which was very early to pick up a running back who only had one good week. And I actually can tell you, because I just checked, that he is only owned in 23% of leagues. Mm-hmm. So if we're following that precedent, people dropped him.
Yes.
Which I imagine might be the case for Austin Eckler.
I agree, but people will be dropping him, which is where you should swoop in. Listen, Austin Eckler, in seasons when Melvin Gordon was starting, was sometimes still a viable flex play. If you want to keep him on your roster in like a 12-team league, I'd recommend it. In 10-team, if you can find a better running back, okay. But he is still a very, very talented running back. I think the most important situation to keep him is if you are a Melvin Gordon owner. Listen, Melvin Gordon hasn't been playing in a while. That is a kind of a warning sign of when someone jumps back in after not playing in a while, that's a high possibility of getting injured. If that's so, Austin Eckler is the handcuff you want. You want to have Austin Eckler if you have Melvin Gordon. Don't trade too much to get him, but if you do have Austin Eckler at this point, I would recommend trying to trade him to the Melvin Gordon owner and trying to see what kind of value you can get. The other running back for the Chargers is Justin Jackson, who we thought maybe split carries with Eckler. He already was not putting up great numbers. Eckler was kind of leading the backfield. Now with Melvin Gordon back in, no question in my mind, drop him. No need for him. I don't think he has much value, if any value at all, in fantasy football.
I would say this is definitely a Nick Aguilar situation. We're seeing, personally, as someone who had Alshon Jeffrey, I went and picked up Nick Aguilar right away. Deshaun Jackson was injured. Alshon Jeffrey was injured. Nelson Aguilar.
Yeah,
did I say Nick Aguilar?
Yeah, it's okay.
Nelson Aguilar put up awesome numbers a week. Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson were both injured. Alshon Jeffrey's now back in. We're not sure what's going to be going on in his first week back because he's still questionable whether or not he's going to be at 100%, whether he's ready to be playing. And that's just having the backup for that player is a beautiful play because we already know Alshon Jeffrey is a strong player in fantasy because of his workload. And if he's gone, then that workload is going to his backup. So in this situation, Austin Eckler is awesome. But we're talking about the backup to the backup. As soon as Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey are both back in, the backup to the backup is worthless. Mm-hmm. He's not going to be getting any touches.
Yep. That's a good point. Nelson Aguilar is a great comparison in this situation. Both teams lost major players. In the Eagles' case, 2 major players. They play my Packers tonight in Thursday Night Football, and go Pack, go. All right, let's move on. Last big news topic we'll talk about. We'll rush through some others later on in the show, but first we're going to talk about Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants. Saquon Barkley is out. He has a high ankle sprain. This is the guy that went first overall in lots of leagues. Most of you have heard of this by now. Some news coming in. He will not be put on IR, and he will not have surgery. That is good news if you're a Saquon Barkley owner, but the bad news is he's still out 4 to 6 weeks.
I'm going to put in my 2 cents on this one. Not as a fantasy football expert by any means, but as someone who sprained both of his ankles 3 months ago with high ankle sprains, I'm going to tell you, high ankle sprains hurt like crazy, but they heal quickly. Not 1 month after I sprained both of my ankles, I was dancing in an entire musical 3 hours long. So I would say if you're talking about a professional athlete, we're talking about someone who's at a physical level way higher than what I ever did, and someone who only injured one of his ankles, even with a high ankle sprain, which is a serious injury, I would not doubt he's back second half of season.
That's a great point. That is shocking how much you and Saquon Barkley have in common, Joe Brown.
I would say that that's not the only thing Saquon Barkley and I have in common, but it's definitely the one coming to mind right now.
What else?
Dashing good looks, a desire for success, eyes on the prize, and quads the size of cantaloupes.
So there we go. Joe Brown, quads of the size of cantaloupes. All right. So Saquon Barkley
come in all sizes.
Saquon Barkley's out. If you have Saquon Barkley, my advice, hold on to him. Unless you are desperate, if your record is 0-3 right now, maybe see if you can get a value trade out of him. But right now, you're a little bit stuck. His backup, Wayne Gallman, is not a name that inspires confidence. What does inspire confidence, other than him being the lead running back, is how well the Giants played with Daniel Jones as quarterback. Daniel Jones scored 34.2 fantasy points in ESPN standard PPR leagues. That is incredible for his first game ever playing. Also, who played well because Daniel Jones played well? Sterling Shepard, 27.1 points. Evan Ingram, 23.3 points. These are 2 wide receivers, 2 major targets for Daniel Jones, and I expect them to be studs going forward, especially Evan Ingram, who, if you were watching the game, this man made a one-handed catch similar to Odell. Well, he didn't fall over afterwards, so it wasn't as athletic as Odell. But it was an extremely athletic play. I just like what I see from Evan Ingram. I think Evan Ingram is a tight end you can trust in a very shallow position in the NFL.
I would agree.
Yeah. Wayne Gallman, the backup running back for Saquon Barkley, will do well. He might be a flex play, but it's in the past he has not been a running back that has inspired confidence. Let's move on. Oh, before we do though, one more name from the Giants. Now that the Giants' offense is functional, it's interesting. They were relying completely on Saquon Barkley. Now they're going to be relying completely on Daniel Jones. Here's a wide receiver for the Giants that is coming back. Golden Tate, who's been on a 4-game suspension. Joe likes that.
Personally, as a longtime Notre Dame fan, I've always really liked Golden Tate. But come on, how often do you hear about someone just like straight Lance Armstronging the NFL? Who does that in the NFL? That's something you hear about from the Olympics. Who's like, oh man, I got to catch more balls. Shoot me up. Get that hippopotamus semen straight in my eye sockets.
That was actually a direct quote from Golden Tate, if you didn't know that.
They have the recording somewhere. It's right next to Donald Trump's P-tape.
So now that Golden Tate is done shooting himself up with all that jazz, he is back in the NFL. A 4-game suspension. Last game will be this week. I like him now that the offense can throw the ball. He is a talented player. He will be the number 2 wide receiver, likely, if you don't count Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram will be the number 1 pass catcher going forward. But I see some value coming out of Golden Tate. So if he's on your waiver wire, maybe try to pick him up. But that's enough with the Giants. Joe, you had something for me.
I did have something for you, David. You see, I am someone who has no life. And as someone who has no life, I spent this afternoon going through the entire list of every single player that is possible to pick up and have on your team in ESPN. And I was in pursuit of one thing. I was looking for some awesome names. You see, at this point in the season, you might be unhappy with your current name. Maybe it's just not inspiring joy the way you thought it would. Maybe it's not quite as insulting to your enemies as you might hope. Maybe you're just trying to mix it up. Maybe you're one of those people that switches your name every single week. So if you're looking for some great name material, I have got the players for you. But before I go through those players,
yes,
David, I would first like to ask you, how many players do you think you can possibly have on your team in the NFL? Because I counted them.
How many players? Does this include kickers and defenses?
Kickers, defenses, like anything that you could have on a roster spot on your team.
Wow. I'm going to say 550.
550 is an excellent guess. Now double it, because there are 1,073 different players that you can have on your team on ESPN. And after you get past page 10, I'm telling you, they're all free agents. And free agents give you the best names. So let's start off with a couple people that might actually add value to your team.
Wait. You went through 1,000 different NFL players?
I went through 1,073 different NFL players.
Joe Brown, you are an incredible person.
Thank you. It really was an achievement in my life when I should have been studying for a final. Anyway, I'd like to start with players that actually might provide value to your team, because there are some of these players that, for sake of being realistic, I'm not going to talk about like Alvin Kamara. You can go like Lights Kamara action, whatever it is, last name. He's on someone's team. He's not sitting around on the waiver wire. So all the players that I have are low enough roster percentage that they might be on your waiver wire. First off, Zane Gonzalez, Arizona kicker. 53.3% of leagues have him on a roster. That is ridiculous. He's tied with Greg Zerlin for the highest kicker points for this entire year. Now, that's in a PPR league, and that's also in a league with, I don't know how the kicking scoring works in other leagues, but in my league, 10.6 points is his average for games. And on top of that, if you have Zane Gonzalez on your team, you could name your team Greedy Gonzalez or TD Gonzalez. Those are quality team names. And on top of that, you get one of the best kickers in the league for him. Moving on.
I will have to fact check the kicker thing, but he is absolutely top 5.
He is an amazing kicker. He's doing great this year. Next, I put Michael Gallup, who is rostered in 65.3% of leagues. He's currently out from injury. I like the idea of making a team name that's just Gallup pull, and then in colon, like, opponent sucks.
Quick fantasy advice about Michael Gallup. If he is on the waiver wire in your league, pick him up. He is on the 3-0 Cowboys, and he is the number 2 wide receiver. And before he got injured, he was playing very, very well. And some impressive route runs, some great speed out of him. And with Amari Cooper with maybe another injury separate from his heel, he is a wide receiver you would like on your team.
Yeah, the next player I'd like to talk about, I'm also going to tell you to pick up because it astounds me that he is only rostered in 62.6% of leagues. DJ Charks is the 8th ranked wide receiver, especially if you're in PPR. But even if you're not in PPR, he is the number 1 receiver for the brand new Gardner Minshew. He has put up no less than 20 points every week so far in PPR. I don't know what he's putting up in non-PPR. But holy crap, pick up DJ Charks. 62% of leagues have him rostered. That is way too low. He is a top 10 wide receiver. And if you put him on your team, you can call your team Sharks Week.
Mm-hmm. In standard PPR scoring, he has scored 24.6, 18.5, and 17.6. And Joe is right. He is currently the 8th wide receiver. If he is on the waiver wire, he will not stay top 10 most likely through the rest of the year. But he is a very talented wide receiver for an offense. Yeah, I mean, he's explosive. He's catching the ball, which is what you'd like to see. He's getting volume, which is king in fantasy football. So, yes, absolutely get DJ Chark and name your team
Sharks Week.
Sharks Week.
Now, the next couple I'm going to go through a little bit quicker. Carlos Hyde is a running back for Houston, rostered in 55.7% of leagues. You can go with Jekyll and Hyde. You can call your team Hide and Go Seek. You can just name your team. You can run, but you can't hide. There's so many opportunities. There's someone on Kansas, wide receiver, 57% of leagues have him rostered, and his name is Mecole Hardman. I didn't even come up with a good name for Hardman. I just think it's awesome. Jason Witten of Dallas, a tight end at 51.1% of leagues have him rostered. You could say it's Witten in stone. Victories, Witten in the stars. Just let your mind go wild. One of my favorite personally that could potentially maybe help your team, although at 39.7% of leagues having him rostered, let's be honest, Nyheim Hines is past his prime. But hindsight's 2020, always a quality pun, and Heinz ketchup. Come on. I mean, I'm not giving full-out puns here, but you can cater these towards your opponents. Really make them hurt. Use your creativity. Tony Pollard, if you're one of the unfortunate 23.8% of leagues that still has Tony Pollard on a roster, you could call your team Marco Pollard. Let's see. I'm going to go through my list here. I got Hunter Renfrow from the Oakland Raiders. Renfrow the Hills. Dawson Knox, a Buffalo tight end. Hard Knocks, which I think is a quality pun, especially given the NFL TV show, or The Hard Knocks Life, if you're a fan of Annie, the musical. Willie Snead, who was once a pretty decent pickup, is now only rostered in 2.2% of leagues have him rostered.
Does he play for Baltimore now?
He's a free agent. He used to play for Baltimore.
Willie Snead. Let me see. Did they drop him? There's no way.
No, wait. He's in Baltimore.
Baltimore still? Okay.
Yeah. We're getting pretty close to free agents here.
Yeah.
But he's all that you need. Come on. Next, we've got Ryan Suckup. I don't know if calling your team the teacher's pet Suckups is in your best interest. I'm not sure that's going to inspire fear in your enemy's heart, but it's a quality pun, and he's currently on injury reserve, so you'll definitely be able to pick him up. Jay Ajayi is only rostered in 1.9% of leagues, and Blueberry Ajayi is a great flavor to make your team. So now we're going to start moving into, these are mostly all free agents, and all of them are under 2% rostered. You got Tai Long, if you want to name your team Tai Shlong, or Tai Lung as in Tai Lung, who is the name of the bad guy in Panda, Kung Fu Panda. If you're
right,
really into Kung Fu Panda. In the recent wake of the Kyle Shlong incident, if you don't have him on your team, you can make a Shlong pun if you pick up Tai Long. He's only rostered in 1.6% of leagues. Demir Bird, who is rostered in 0.5% of leagues. If you're a fan of Family Guy, the bird is the word. Perfect, good right there. All right, so this next one, I would like to preface with an old joke that I love very much. David, are you aware of the wonderful novel Silence of the Lambs?
I've never read it, but I have seen the movie.
I've seen the movie. So you are aware of the very famous movie based on the novel Silence of the Lambs?
Yes.
So what I would first like to say is that this player's name is Jalen Hurd. And I think in order to understand my joke about Jalen Hurd, hold on one second.
Jalen Hurd. Sounds a lot like, sounds a lot like Jalen Hurd. I can't think of what I was going to say, so we will...
Right. So we're going to talk about Thomas Harris. Thomas Harris, who wrote the original Silence of the Lambs novel.
Yes.
So you say Thomas Harris walks into his editor's office one day, and he says to his editor, I've got this great idea for a new novel. You're going to love it. The editor says, well, I hope it's better than the idea you pitched me yesterday. All that nonsense about a murderer named Herderer. And there you have it, folks. Pick up Jalen Hurd, and you can call your team the Herderers.
A murderer named Herderer. All right. We have about 18 minutes left.
Right.
15,
so
18.
Before we end this segment, I'm going to hit you
Joe.
with just my three or four favorites. I'm going to go through these real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Jake Butt, pick him up. Name your team Suck My Butt. Reggie Bonifan, you can name your team Cinnabonifan. Byron Pringle. Chris Blewett, in case you've already screwed over yourself after Thursday, pick him up, change your team name to Chris Blewett. He's rostered in 0% of leagues, so you'll definitely get him. Also rostered in 0% of leagues is Juwan Winfree, which is spelled Winfree. My favorite name for that is Juwanna B. Winfree. Call that to your opponent. Also, Mason Shrek. If you're a fan of Shrek, name your team Shrek is Love, Shrek is Life, or get Shreked. Daniel Braverman. If you want to name your team A Braver Man Than You, couldn't beat me. And finally, my favorite name of any player that you could possibly pick up in fantasy football, and he is rostered in 0% of leagues, is Jeremy Sprinkle.
This has been Joe Brown's list of players to pick up if you need a better fantasy team name.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. A quick reminder for people who've tuned in after we started. This is a fantasy football kind of podcast radio show we're doing here. If you came to Pizza FM to listen to music, there will be more music following us. But this is kind of a little change of pace for Pizza FM. So let's get right back into it. I actually have some fan-submitted questions from one of our friends. He's in our league. Okay. We're going to go through a couple of them. Probably not all of them. We don't have time because Joe and I have some other things we want to talk about. First one, question one. Is O.J. Howard worth dropping at this point? O.J. Howard, the tight end for the Buccaneers. He has not put up great fantasy points. That would be an understatement. O.J. Howard, who people expected to be a top 5, top 6 tight end this year, not doing so hot. He has scored in the past 3 games 5.2, 0 in a game where he was either injured or just didn't have any catches. Assuming injured if against Carolina, and 9.6 against the Giants, against the New York Giants, where Jameis Winston kind of popped off for the first time, and it's once again the New York Giants, a bad defense. So what do you do with O.J. Howard at this point? Normally, if your player is putting up these numbers, you'd probably drop him. You'd probably get rid of him. There's just one problem. O.J. Howard plays at tight end. And tight end is a very limited position this year. If you were lucky enough to pick up Delaney Walker later, Darren Waller of the Oakland Raiders, if you were lucky, even Austin Hooper had a great game last week. Or, if you have, I know Kittle and Ertz have not been putting up the numbers you've been hoping for, but they're still the part of the perfect trifecta, the top 3 tight ends. If you have Kelsey, you're good. Otherwise, if you have O.J. Howard, you're unhappy. If you have Hunter Henry, you're unhappy. There's a lot of disappointment right now in the tight end position. The only problem is it does not get much better. There aren't a lot of tight ends that get great volume. So if you have O.J. Howard on your lineup, I would keep him for now. I would not drop him. He is a very talented player on an offense that seems to finally be getting their footing. I expect more targets for him coming up. However, I wouldn't necessarily play him this week yet either. If there's an option on your waiver wire, if you've got Detroit Lions, TJ Hawkinson, he might have a good game this week. If any of the other players I've listed, obviously Kelsey won't be there. But if Mark Andrews from Baltimore Ravens, he's probably been picked up, but if he's there, not a bad pickup. And if you need a fill-in tight end this week, I would not object to tight end Tyler Eifert from the Cincinnati Bengals. They're playing Pittsburgh this week, who have been kind of abysmal as a team in general. And for a 1-week rental, I would be okay with Jordan Akins from the Houston Texans. He had a good game last week. They're playing the Carolina Panthers this week. That should be a decently high-scoring game.
Of course, if you're very desperate, there's really only one man for the job, and I should inform you that Jeremy Sprinkle is a tight end.
Jeremy Sprinkle, rostered in 0% of leagues.
He's also rostered in 0% of NFL teams, so maybe that's one of the reasons.
So maybe you take a chance on Sprinkle. All right. The second question, Joe, for us today. There's a couple other ones, but I think this is the only one we'll have time for because we're going to go back to you in a second. Has Josh Jacobs done enough to give you confidence that he will be an RB2 for the rest of the season? Let's actually talk about running backs in general. Running back has been hit or miss this season. In your running backs that have been drafted third round through the first 3 or 4 rounds, there have been a lot of good and a whole lot of ugly. I kind of here have it split into a list of 10 on each side. 10 successes and 10 panics. 10 successes. Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, it's Christian McCaffrey. You're getting what you expected out of him. Alvin Kamara from the New Orleans Saints. Dalvin Cook, currently the number 1 scoring running back right now. If you picked up Dalvin Cook, you're very happy. Ezekiel Elliott has been doing pretty well. David Johnson, decently well. He got injured for part of a game, but he's back playing healthy. I'm not worried about him. A player I did not expect to do as well as he's doing, Derrick Henry from the Tennessee Titans. He's been doing well. I don't think you see the same amount of, I think what you saw week 2 and week 3, especially week 3, are more likely what you're going to see going forward than week 1, but still a good running back. And also Marlon Mack has been doing pretty well. Also, a part of the success story, but each of them with their own little worries. I have Nick Chubb, who has been playing great despite the Browns have been playing awful, but my worry is that the Browns have been playing awful. Aaron Jones, who's been playing great, but is a little bit banged up, and the coach for the Packers has said that he wants to involve Jamal Williams some more. However, Aaron Jones, still an amazing running back, still RB2 territory. And finally, Le'Veon Bell for the Jets. The only reason I'm worried about him is going into the season, I was a little worried. I'm less worried that he would be rusty now. He's been playing very well. I'm more worried about how just frightening the Jets, how unlucky the Jets have gotten with injuries. Obviously, Sam Darnold, their starting quarterback, had mono. He'll be back eventually. Their backup quarterback, out for the season. They're on their 3rd string quarterback. So they kind of have to rely on Le'Veon Bell. That worries me a little bit because if you give him too much work, there's some potential for injury. But fantasy-wise, he's getting more work, which you love. So all of those guys have been doing very well. Here are a list of running backs that we expected to do well that have not been doing well.
Saquon Barkley.
Good call. He's been doing well, but he's injured for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Obvious worry there. Todd Gurley has had an abysmal season so far, has been getting his goal line work vultured, has not been running well. It's just not the Todd Gurley we're used to. And frankly, that's because Todd Gurley came into the season a little bit injured. They told us before the season started they would have him on a pitch count. I think things get better for Todd Gurley, but I'm a little worried about how much better they get. I don't think they get that much better. And you're not going to be able to trade him for good value. You're not going to be able to, what people will offer you, probably not worth. If you could get an RB2 for Todd Gurley, I might take it. Below that, which is what people would probably offer you for him, I mean, you're just going to have to write it out. Hope the rest of your picks work out. James Conner for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers have been atrocious this season. Just awful, awful, awful. Part of that as their team leader, Ben Roethlisberger, out for the season in a very hard way to watch. That does hurt Conner's value. He also just hasn't been running well. Someone I would also potentially think about trading away. He's been getting a good amount of volume, and he just hasn't been able to do much with it. But once again, you're going to have trouble finding as much value for him as you drafted him as. So unfortunately, you're a little stuck there. It's up to you whether or not you want to keep him, but if a good situation arises to trade him, I would not object to that. Another player I might consider trading, Devontae Freeman. This is the Atlanta Falcons running back.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I have him on my team.
I'm sorry to say that, Joe. He has been playing not well either, and this is an offensive line we were raving about going into the season. It's an offensive line that should be giving him opportunities, and he just hasn't been running well. Another player I would consider trading. Here are some players that have not been performing well that I think will do better in the future. Sorry, give me a second. Joe Mixon. He's not been playing well. He's been a little bit injured, but he's back from that injury. His offensive line, honestly, looks really bad. It's bad. But what the Bengals have been doing well so far this season is throwing. And Mixon, last week, was a part of the passing game. He was a good factor in the passing game. And you like to see that from a running back. And especially in PPR leagues, you want a running back that is catching passes. So Mixon, I am not panicked about yet. Another running back I'm not panicked about yet that has been underperforming, Leonard Fournette. I did not like him going into the season. He went 3rd or 4th round. And he has not been amazing so far this season. But that is because he has not found the end zone yet. Leonard Fournette will find the end zone. He is the kind of running back that will find the end zone. They will use him on goal line work, and they will depend on him when they get close to the goal line. And I think that offense needs him. And it's not like he's been running poorly. His yards per carry are average around 4-ish, 3-ish. It's not horrible. It gets you a first down if you run three times. Gets you close to the first down. It's not all-star like we like to see from Leonard Fournette, but so far, I am not worried about Leonard Fournette. A running back I am worried about, Damian Williams from the Kansas City Chiefs, has been injured. Not Ty Montgomery, not worried about him. David Montgomery from the Bears has been seeing not that much volume, not as much volume as we were hoping for. Excuse me. He had an uptake in this week, but it wasn't a gigantic game for him against a team that they blew out. It was the Redskins, and they had an amazing offensive day against the Redskins. At least most of the Bears did. How did Montgomery score? David Montgomery scored 11.1 points. That's on track for good, but only 67 yards of rushing against Washington. It was a team, they didn't completely blow out, but it was not a pretty game for Washington, and they finally hit their stride as offense. So I am worried about David Montgomery. So if you are in a standard league with 2 running backs, it's likely that one of the running backs you have is good and one of them has been underperforming. That's all right. There's not too many options on the waivers right now, but stick to your guns. Maybe make a couple of trades. See what value you can get for them. But if you have good depth at wide receiver, 2 running backs, a 3rd one on your bench is all you need. Hopefully, if you drafted people like running backs like Darius Geis, Saquon Barkley, who have been injured, hopefully they come back and they perform well for you. Otherwise, scour those waivers, make good trades, and hope for the best. Joe, let's go to you.
Right, we're going to close this out today. As somebody who doesn't know that much about football, and as David's talking about these trades, we're getting into the part of the game where people are going to be making trades with you. And if you're like me and you're the league fool. People are going to be trying to screw you over in trades. So I've created a 3-pronged strategy to tell whether or not someone is screwing you over in trades. So if you don't know what you're doing and someone starts offering you trades, you're going to want to watch out for these. The first one is if they offer you a 1-for-1 trade, one of their wide receivers for one of your wide receivers, one of their running backs, one of your running backs. If you're just switching players, they are 100% getting the better deal. There's no way they would offer you a 1-for-1 unless they were getting the better half of it. That's not how trading works. Secondly, if somebody offers you a trade for your number 1 draft pick, they are not doing you a favor. I don't care if they offer you 3-4 players. Those are players that you don't want crowding your bench, even if they're half decent. 3 half-decent players are not the same thing as having a healthy Saquon Barkley on your deck, on your running back lineup. And finally, and this one is my favorite because I feel like it should be a no-brainer, and yet I've fallen for this before. If someone offers you a trade and they are your opponent for that week, there is no way they're doing you a favor. If they really, really cared about that trade, they'd wait until next week. So those have been my 3 tips for people who don't know what they're doing in fantasy. Make sure you don't get screwed over on trades.
My one addition to that list is look at players' future. When you're making a trade, look at who they're playing upcoming. Have they put up good numbers so far, but that was against bad defenses, and they're playing a lot of good defenses? Do they want your player? Because upcoming, they play a lot of weak defenses. Always think about why does your opponent want your player specifically? Maybe try, if they're asking desperately, try to get a little more out of the trade. Start high and then meet at a happy middle ground. Also, the one thing I'll say about a 1-for-1 trade, if it's someone who needs a running back and has a lot of receivers and you need a wide receiver and have a lot of running backs, that's okay for a 1-for-1 trade if you need to fill
switching
position.
type. I'm saying if they're the same position 1-to-1.
Exactly. Do not trust that. They are trying to take advantage of you. All right. Joe, to close out this podcast, I'm going to play a quick game with you of what I'll call boom and bust. This is what players that I think you should be picking up based on how they've been playing so far, or maybe even dropping. But I'm going to keep their identity secret. I'm going to see if you can guess who they are.
All right, let's see.
We're going to start in the quarterback position. Okay. Joe, this quarterback has had the 11th most points among QBs so far this season. Mm-hmm. That is above Matthew Stafford, Phillip Rivers, Jared Goff, and my beloved Aaron Rodgers. Can you guess who this is?
I think it's Jacoby Brissett.
It is not. That is a decent guess. It is Case Keenum.
Case Keenum.
Of the Washington Redskins.
Wow.
Had an abysmal game against the Bears. Had 5 turnovers, 3 interceptions, 2 fumbles. Got only 11.6 points that game. He still has the 11th most points among quarterbacks. He has thrown for 332 yards against this top-tier Bears defense. We'll see if he stays the starting quarterback for the Redskins throughout the season. But as of right now, he has his job, and he's playing the Giants this week. He is playing the Giants. If you need a fill-in quarterback because it's bye week, or your quarterback has been underperforming, Case Keenum is a good fill-in. Pick up Case Keenum. Let's go to the bust section of the quarterbacks. Right. This quarterback has scored the 25th most points among quarterbacks. There are 32 teams in the NFL. That is below Gardner Minshew, Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins of the run-heavy Vikings, and Joe Flacco of the Denver Broncos. Can you guess which quarterback this is? I'll give you a hint that he was drafted top 8 quarterback in most leagues.
Top 8 quarterbacks?
Yes.
Well, that changes my guess away from Mitchell Trubisky. I can tell you that much.
He also has not been performing well.
Yeah, but that's a whole different host. I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers.
Good guess. Aaron Rodgers has been underperforming so far. However, he has faced 3 really tough defenses. I expect, especially this week against the Eagles, for him to have a breakout game and do better. But he's not going to be as good as he has been in season past.
Yeah, bold words coming from a Packers fanboy.
Hey, I'm a homer. What can I say? The quarterback that I am referring to is Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield has scored so far this season 34.1 points and has had 5 interceptions over 3 games. Joe Brown, there's a quarterback that has scored 33.4 total points in fantasy. That is Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, who has played 1 week, is less than a point behind Baker Mayfield of the Cleveland Browns. Do I think the Browns get better? For everyone's sake, I hope the offense gets better. But right now, they are not playing well. And if you have Baker Mayfield and have a better option for QB, and you don't want to hang on to two quarterbacks, you can drop Baker Mayfield. All right. We are running out of time, so I'm going to really quickly end with wide receivers. One that Joe already mentioned, 8th ranked overall, which is above Mike Evans, John Ross, who's been a popular pickup, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Larry Fitzgerald. That, of course, is DJ Chark. I do not expect him to end 8th, even top 10. He's had the luxury of having 1 touchdown every game he's played, which helps boost his stats, but he will be a top 20 wide receiver throughout the rest of the season. Joe, how do you feel about that call?
He is ludicrously under-rostered. 40% of leagues, no one has him.
Go out and pick him up, please. We talked a lot about running backs, so we'll skip that, but we will talk about busts and wide receivers so far. The first one is the 47th overall, and right now, since we're running out of time, I'm just going to give you their name. Devontae Adams, lead wide receiver and first-round pick from the Green Bay Packers. First-round pick in fantasy leagues. He's 47th overall right now, which is below Calvin Ridley, Chris Conley of the Jaguars, Jamison Crowder, Cole Beasley, and his own teammate, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. However, he has played a string of tough defenses, and it will get better. Same deal for Aaron Rodgers. I expect him to break out tonight. Another wide receiver who's not been playing well, Stephon Diggs, 72 overall. This is the guy you were picking up 3rd or 4th round from the Vikings. Yet to score in the double digits of fantasy points. I expect things to get marginally better for Stephon Diggs, but Dalvin Cook has been the star of this offense. Not Case Keenum. Not Case Keenum. I need to memorize my quarterbacks. I'm sorry, everyone. Kirk Cousins, quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, has not needed to throw that much because Dalvin Cook has been spectacular. So I expect Stephon Diggs to go up. They've been targeting him. He caught a touchdown last game, but it got called back because of a penalty. But I don't expect him to go up that much. If you can buy low on him, if you get a good deal, maybe get Stephon Diggs. Don't drop him, but don't get your hopes up too much. He probably won't be worth what you drafted him as. All right, that is it for us today. Thank you so much for listening to Touchdown with Hansen and Brown. Joe, anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
I would just like to make this quick because David's got somewhere to be.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Guys, we will be back next week, hopefully, Thursday, and we will find a way. Right now, it's only live stream. We will find a way to archive these videos. If you enjoyed this podcast, tell your friends. I think we had a good time. We talked a lot of stats. We'll try to bring up the energy, the fun, and the jokes and the humor in the future. We're just trying to get a sense for the timing this episode. But overall, it was a great day. Thank you, Joe, for joining me. Thank you all for listening in. This has been Pizza FM, and coming up next is some more music. Goodbye, everyone.